Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to hear another story that's been rattling around in my head for years. This one's called The Shadow in the Hallways, and it's not your typical high school tale. It's about a quiet kid pushed to the edge, a school that felt too safe to be true, and a moment that changed how I saw the world. Strange things can happen in the places you least expect, and sometimes the people you overlook are the ones who leave the deepest mark. Stick with me because the story's got layers, and it's one I still wrestle with when the nights get too quiet. I grew up in a small town called Willow Creek, Nebraska, the kind of place where the biggest news is the annual county fair or who won the high school football game. My high school, Willow Creek High, wasn't one of those massive suburban schools with thousands of kids. We had maybe 250 in my graduating class of 2008, small enough that you knew everyone's name, even if you weren't buddies. You'd pass someone in the hallway, give a nod, and keep moving. It was comforting in a way, like living in a bubble where nothing too wild ever happened. Our idea of fun was grabbing burgers at Marty's Diner or cruising down dirt roads in someone's beat-up pickup, blasting country music. Cell phones were around, sure, but they were those clunky flip ones, and social media was just MySpace, nothing like today. Life felt simpler, or at least I thought it did. I was a junior, 16 going on 17, trying to figure out who I was. My name's Ethan Carter, by the way. I wasn't the star quarterback or the class clown, just a guy who got decent grades, played on the JV baseball team, and hung out with a tight group of friends, Jake, Sarah, and Mike. We'd spend lunch joking around in the cafeteria, sneaking extra fries from each other's trays, or debating whether we'd ever get out of Willow Creek. The school itself was old, built in the 70s, with faded green lockers and tiled floors that echoed when you walked. The air always smelled faintly of bleach and chalk dust, and the windows let in this soft, dusty light that made everything feel a little hazy, like a memory you're not sure is real. Our teachers were a mixed bag. Most were locals who'd grown up in Willow Creek, like Mrs. Larson, our English teacher, who'd ramble about Shakespeare like he was her neighbor. Then there was Mr. Donovan, the history teacher, who doubled as the track coach and had a temper if you didn't pay attention. But the one class everyone talked about was computer applications, an elective taught by Mr. Kessler. He was young, maybe late 20s, with this laid-back vibe that made you think he'd rather be anywhere else. The computer lab was stuck in the 90s, big, bulky monitors that hummed when you turned them on, and those plasticky keyboards that clacked loud enough to wake a coma patient. The room had 2 rows of tables, for computers per row, and a big window at the back that looked out onto the football field. It was the kind of place where you'd zone out, staring at the grass while pretending to learn Excel. That's where I first noticed Caleb Morris. He was in my grade, but I didn't know him well. Nobody really did. Caleb was the kind of kid who seemed to blend into the walls. Average height, brown hair, always wore plain t-shirts and jeans. Nothing flashy. He wasn't weird-looking or anything, just quiet. Not shy quiet, but the kind of quiet where you wondered if he was even there. In computer applications, he always sat in the back left corner, closest to the window, his eyes fixed on the screen like it was his only friend. The class had kids from all grades, maybe 20 of us total, so it wasn't packed. Most people sat with their friends, laughing and whispering, but Caleb was always alone. I'd see him typing away, his fingers moving fast, like he actually cared about the assignments. Once or twice, I caught him glancing around, like he was checking if anyone was watching, but he'd look away quick. At first, I didn't think much of it. High school's full of kids who keep to themselves, right? But there was something about Caleb that stuck with me, maybe because of how he carried himself, like he was holding on to a secret he didn't want to share. I remember one day early in the semester, Mr. Kessler asked him a question about some coding thing we were doing, basic HTML or something. Caleb answered in this low, steady voice, no hesitation, and got it right. Kessler nodded, impressed, but a couple of seniors in the back snickered. I don't know why. Maybe they thought it was funny that the quiet kid knew more than them. One of them, Derek Hayes, leaned over and muttered something to his buddy, Tyler. They both laughed, and Caleb's shoulders tensed, just for a second, before he went back to his screen. I didn't hear what Derek said, but it didn't feel friendly. That was the start of it, I guess. Derek and Tyler were the kind of guys who thought they owned the school. Derek was tall, broad-shouldered on the varsity football team, with this cocky grin that made you want to punch him. Tyler was his sidekick, shorter but just as loud, always egging Derek on. They weren't bullies in the movie sense, no shoving kids into lockers or stealing lunch money, but they had a way of picking at people, especially if you didn't fit in. Caleb was an easy target. He didn't talk back, didn't react, just sat there like a statue. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing it more. Derek would make some dumb comment about Caleb being the silent ninja or creepy quiet, and Tyler would laugh like it was the funniest thing ever. Sometimes they'd lean over and pretend to whisper, loud enough for everyone to hear. Stuff like, "Yo, does he even blink?" It was stupid, but it got under your skin, especially when Caleb didn't do anything to stop it. I felt bad, I really did. I'd catch myself watching Caleb, waiting for him to snap or say something, but he never did. His face stayed blank, his eyes locked on the computer, like he was somewhere else. Once, I tried talking to him after class, just a casual, "Hey, you good at this coding stuff, huh?" He looked at me, surprised, and gave a small nod before grabbing his backpack and heading out. That was it. I didn't push it. Part of me wanted to say something to Derek and Tyler, tell them to knock it off, but I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my business, that Caleb could handle it. Looking back, I hate that I stayed quiet. It's one of those things that gnaws at you, you know? When you realize you could have done something but didn't. Things stayed like that for a while. Derek and Tyler's comments, Caleb's silence, the rest of us pretending it wasn't happening. But then, maybe a month into the semester, something shifted. It was small at first, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. I was walking to my locker after school, cutting through the science wing, when I saw Caleb standing by the exit door, staring out at the parking lot. He wasn't moving, just standing there, his hands in his pockets, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The way he was looking out, it wasn't like he was waiting for a ride. It was like he was searching for something, or someone. I slowed down, thinking about saying hi, but then he turned and saw me. His eyes locked onto mine for a split second, and I swear, there was something in them, anger, maybe, or hurt. Before I could say anything, he pushed the door open and walked out. I stood there, feeling uneasy, like I'd just seen something I wasn't supposed to. That moment stuck with me, and it was the first time I wondered if Caleb was okay, or if something bigger was brewing under the surface. Little did I know that was just the beginning. Willow Creek High had this rhythm to it, like a heartbeat you didn't notice until it skipped. Mornings started with the screech of bus brakes and the chatter of kids spilling into the hallways, their sneakers squeaking on the polished floors. By first period, the air was thick with the smell of cheap coffee from the teacher's lounge and the faint tang of teenage sweat. I'd shuffle to my locker, juggling textbooks and a half-eaten granola bar, dodging the freshmen who always seemed to walk in slow motion. It was predictable, comforting, even the kind of routine that made you think nothing could go wrong. But looking back, I see the cracks now, the little things I ignored because they didn't fit the picture of our sleepy little town. My days revolved around the same loop. Classes, lunch with Jake, Sarah, and Mike, then baseball practice if we had it. Jake was the loud one, always cracking jokes, his shaggy blonde hair falling into his eyes. Sarah was quieter, sharp-witted, the kind of person who'd call you out but make you laugh while she did it. Mike was the glue, steady and easygoing, always carrying a sketchbook where he'd doodle random stuff like dragons or spaceships. We'd sit at our usual table in the cafeteria, a wobbly one near the windows, and talk about nothing important, movies, who was dating who, or how we'd all move to Chicago or Denver someday. The cafeteria was loud, a mess of voices and clattering trays, with sunlight streaming through the tall windows, painting everything in warm gold. It felt safe, like the world couldn't touch us there. But even in that safety, I started noticing Caleb more, not just in computer applications but around school. He was like a ghost, always on the edges. I'd see him in the library during study hall, hunched over a book, not a textbook but something thick, like a sci-fi novel. Once, I passed him in the hallway between classes and he was staring at the floor, his shoulders hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. I wondered what went through his head, if he ever laughed or got mad or felt anything at all. It wasn't like I was obsessed with him or anything, but he stuck out because he didn't fit. Everyone else had a place, jocks, nerds, theater kids, but Caleb was just there. One day, I was late to computer applications because Coach Riley held us back at practice, going off about teamwork or some nonsense. When I slipped into the lab, Mr. Kessler barely looked up from his laptop, just waved me to my seat. I sat in the third row, 2 seats from Derek and Tyler, who were messing around as usual, flicking paper clips at each other. Caleb was in his corner, same as always, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The assignment was something about creating a basic web page, and I was struggling, my code spitting out errors like it had a personal grudge. I glanced at Caleb, wondering how he made it look so easy. That's when I noticed something odd. His screen wasn't showing the assignment. It was a black window, like a command prompt, with lines of white text scrolling fast. I couldn't read it from where I was, but it looked serious, like he was hacking into the Pentagon or something. I told myself it was probably just a side project, maybe extra credit. But it nagged at me, that glimpse of something I didn't understand. After class, I hung back, pretending to pack my bag slowly. Caleb was still at his computer, shutting it down, his movements careful, like he didn't want to draw attention. Derek and Tyler were already gone, their laughter echoing down the hall. I thought about asking Caleb what he was working on, but Mr. Kessler called me over to talk about my missing homework. By the time I was done, Caleb was gone. I walked out into the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and caught a glimpse of him turning the corner toward the back exit. Something about the way he moved, quick, purposeful, made me pause. It was like he had somewhere to be, somewhere no one else knew about. That night, I was at Marty's diner with Jake and Sarah, splitting a plate of fries. The diner was a time capsule with red vinyl booths and a jukebox that still played Johnny Cash. We were joking about how Mr. Donovan had tripped over a chair in history class, but my mind kept drifting to Caleb. I mentioned him casually, saying I saw him doing some weird coding stuff. Jake shrugged, dipping a fry in ketchup. Dude's probably building a robot in his basement, he said, laughing. Sarah raised an eyebrow, her dark curls bouncing as she leaned forward. Or maybe he's just bored. Not everyone's gotta be loud like you, Jake. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Sarah's words stuck with me, maybe Caleb was just bored. But boredom didn't explain the look in his eyes that day by the exit door, or the way he seemed to carry the weight of something heavy. The next day at school, I saw Caleb again, this time in the courtyard during lunch. He was sitting under a tree away from the picnic tables where everyone else hung out. He had a notebook open, scribbling something, his hand moving fast. A couple of sophomores walked by, tossing a football, and one of them yelled, "Yo, Morris, you writing a manifesto, or what?" They laughed and kept going, but Caleb didn't even flinch. He just kept writing like the world didn't exist. I stood there, my tray of pizza and milk in my hands, feeling a mix of pity and frustration. Why didn't he say something back? Why didn't he stand up for himself? I wanted to walk over, say something, anything, but Mike called me back to our table and I let the moment slip away. It was easier to stay in my bubble, to pretend everything was fine. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Not for Caleb and maybe not for any of us. The weeks rolled on and Willow Creek High settled into its usual groove, but something felt off, like a song played just a hair out of tune. I couldn't put my finger on it, but Caleb was at the center of it. He was still in computer applications, still in his corner, but the air around him seemed heavier now. Derek and Tyler hadn't let up, their comments getting sharper, more personal. One day, Derek leaned back in his chair, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Hey, Caleb, you ever smile? Or is your face just stuck like that?" Tyler snorted and a few other kids chuckled, but it wasn't funny. It was mean, the kind of mean that lingers. Caleb didn't react, just kept typing, but I saw his jaw tighten, a flicker of something dark in his expression before it vanished. I wondered what it took to stay that quiet, to swallow that kind of crap every day. Outside of class, I started seeing Caleb in places I hadn't noticed before. Once, I was grabbing my cleats from the gym locker room after practice when I heard a faint tapping from the equipment room. The door was cracked open and there was Caleb sitting on a stack of mats, messing with what looked like a small circuit board. Wires and tiny lights were spread out around him, like he was building something. He didn't see me and I didn't say anything, just backed away quietly. It wasn't my business, but it added to the puzzle. What was he doing in there, alone after hours? Was he hiding from someone, or was he up to something else? My mind spun with possibilities, from innocent hobbies to wild conspiracies, but I pushed them down. I wasn't some detective and Caleb wasn't my problem. Still, I couldn't stop watching him. In the cafeteria one day, I saw him sitting alone at a table in the corner, picking at a sandwich. A group of cheerleaders walked by, giggling, and one of them, Ashley Reed, tossed her hair and said, "God, he's so weird," loud enough for him to hear. Caleb's eyes flicked up for a second, then back down like he was used to it. I felt a pang of guilt sitting with my friends laughing about stupid stuff while he was over there, invisible to everyone but me. I told Sarah about it later when we were walking to chemistry. She frowned, twisting a strand of her hair. Maybe he likes being alone, Ethan. Not everyone needs a squad. But her voice wasn't convincing, and I could tell she felt uneasy too. Jake, who'd overheard, just rolled his eyes. Dude, you're overthinking it. He's fine. But I wasn't so sure. The weirdest thing happened a few days later. I was in the library trying to finish a history paper I'd put off too long. The library was quiet, just the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional flip of a page. I was in the back, near the old reference section, when I heard a low voice. It was Caleb, sitting at a table half hidden by a shelf, talking to someone on a flip phone. I couldn't hear much, just fragments, not yet, and I need more time. His tone was urgent, almost angry, nothing like the flat voice he used in class. I froze, pretending to scan a book, my heart pounding. Who was he talking to? Nobody at school ever saw him with a phone, and the way he was hunched over, shielding the call, made it feel wrong. He hung up abruptly, stuffed the phone in his pocket, and grabbed his backpack. As he left, he passed right by me, and I swear he gave me a look, not hostile but sharp, like he knew I'd been listening. I stood there, my paper forgotten, my mind racing. Was he in trouble? Was he planning something? Or was I just being paranoid? That night, I couldn't sleep. My room was dark except for the glow of my alarm clock, and I kept replaying that phone call in my head. I thought about telling someone, Mr. Kessler, maybe, or even my parents, but what would I say? That Caleb was acting weird? That I didn't trust him? It sounded stupid, even to me. I rolled over, staring at the ceiling, the hum of crickets outside my window doing nothing to calm me. Part of me wanted to believe Caleb was just a loner, maybe dealing with family stuff or a secret project. But another part, the part that kept me awake, whispered that I was missing something big. I didn't know it then, but that feeling was about to get a lot louder, and it wouldn't be long before I wished I'd paid more attention. October hit Willow Creek like a slow burn. The air turning crisp. The trees outside school blazing red and orange. The hallways buzzed with talk of homecoming. Posters for the dance plastered on every wall. But I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. Caleb was still a shadow in computer applications, but the teasing from Derek and Tyler had escalated. It wasn't just comments anymore. One day, I saw Tyler accidentally bump Caleb's chair as he walked by, hard enough to make Caleb's hands slip off the keyboard. Derek laughed, loud and fake, saying, "Oops, my bad, man." Caleb didn't look up, but his fingers hovered over the keys, frozen, before he started typing again. The room felt smaller in those moments, like the air was being sucked out. Mr. Kessler, as usual, was oblivious, scrolling through his laptop at the front. I wanted to say something, to tell them to cut it out, but my voice stayed stuck in my throat. I hated myself for it. For sitting there like a coward, pretending to focus on my own screen. Outside class, Caleb's isolation seemed to deepen. I'd see him in the hallways, always alone. His backpack slung low, his eyes scanning the crowd like he was looking for an escape. Once, during a fire drill, when everyone was milling around the parking lot, I spotted him standing off to the side, near the chain-link fence. He was staring at the school, his expression unreadable. Hands stuffed in his pockets. A couple of kids nearby were joking about skipping the rest of the day, but Caleb didn't seem to hear them. I wondered what he saw when he looked at the building. Did he hate it, fear it, or something else? I almost walked over, but Sarah grabbed my arm, pulling me back to our group. "You're staring, Ethan," she said, half teasing, half serious. I shrugged it off, but her words stung. Maybe I was staring, but it was because I couldn't look away. One afternoon, I was at my locker, swapping out books, when I overheard a conversation that made my stomach twist. Ashley Reed and her friend Lauren were a few lockers down, whispering but not quietly enough. "I heard Caleb's been sneaking around the school at night," Ashley said, her voice dripping with gossip. "Like, someone saw him near the boiler room last week." Lauren gasped, fake and dramatic. "That's so creepy. What's he even doing?" I slammed my locker shut, louder than I meant to, and they both jumped, glancing at me. I didn't say anything, just walked away, but my mind was spinning. Was it true? The boiler room was this dingy, off-limits part of the school. All rusted pipes and flickering lights. Why would Caleb be there? It sounded like the kind of rumor kids spread to mess with someone. But after the phone call in the library, I wasn't so sure. I decided to keep an eye out, not in a stalker way, but just aware. A few days later, I stayed late after baseball practice, helping Coach Riley put away equipment. The school was quiet, the hallways dim, the only sound the hum of the vending machines. As I headed to the parking lot, I passed the science wing and saw a flicker of movement through the glass doors. I stopped, my breath catching. It was Caleb, slipping out of a side exit, a flashlight beam bouncing in his hand. He didn't see me, and I ducked behind a pillar, my heart racing. He moved fast, heading toward the back of the school, where the maintenance sheds were. I stood there, torn between following him and getting the hell out. What was he doing with a flashlight at 7 p.m.? Part of me wanted to believe it was nothing. Maybe a janitor asked him to grab something. But the flashlight, the secrecy, it felt wrong. I didn't tell anyone, not even Sarah or Jake. Felt too big, too uncertain. Instead, I kept watching Caleb in class, looking for clues. His screen was back to normal assignments now, no more command prompts, but he seemed more distracted, his eyes darting to the door every time someone walked by. Once, when Mr. Kessler called on him, he didn't answer right away, like he hadn't heard. The whole class turned to look, and Derek muttered, "Earth to freak show." Under his breath, Caleb's face flushed, just for a second, before he answered the question perfectly. I could feel the tension in the room, like a wire pulled tight, ready to snap. I wondered how much more he could take before something gave. That night, I was lying in bed, the glow of my phone lighting up my room. I'd been scrolling through MySpace, but my mind was on Caleb. I kept thinking about the flashlight, the boiler room rumor, the phone call. I typed his name into the search bar, not expecting much, but nothing came up, no profile, no posts, nothing. It wasn't surprising, but it added to the mystery. Who was this kid? Did he have friends outside school, a life nobody knew about? Or was he as alone as he seemed? I turned off my phone, the darkness closing in, and tried to sleep, but my dreams were restless, filled with flickering lights and locked doors. The first real crack in Willow Creek High's bubble came on a Wednesday in late October, gray and chilly, the kind of day where the clouds hung low and heavy. I was in third period, English with Mrs. Larson, half listening to her talk about the Great Gatsby. My notebook was open, but I was doodling baseball bats, my mind wandering to Caleb and that flashlight. The classroom was warm, the radiator hissing, and I was fighting to keep my eyes open when the loudspeaker crackled. "Attention, all students and staff." Principal Hayes's voice boomed, sharp and clipped. "We are initiating a lockdown. This is not a drill. Follow all procedures immediately." The room went still, like someone hit pause. Mrs. Larson's face paled, her hands trembling as she hurried to the door, locking it with a loud click. She turned off the lights and motioned us to the corner, her voice a shaky whisper. "Under the desks now. Stay quiet." We scrambled, desks scraping the floor, backpacks thumping as we crouched in the dark. My heart was pounding, my palms sweaty against the cold tile. Sarah was next to me, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes wide. Jake was on my other side, his usual grin gone, replaced by a tight-lipped frown. Nobody spoke, but I could hear everyone breathing, quick and shallow. The classroom felt like a tomb, the only light a thin sliver sneaking through the blinds. I kept thinking about Caleb, wondering where he was, if he was crouched under a desk somewhere or something else. My mind flashed to the flashlight, the phone call, the boiler room. Was this about him? I pushed the thought away, but it kept creeping back, like a splinter I couldn't ignore. Minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. We heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, not the rushed stride of a teacher or a cop. They stopped outside our door, and I swear my heart stopped too. A soft knock came 3 times, polite almost. Nobody moved. Mrs. Larson pressed a finger to her lips, her eyes locked on the door. The knob rattled just once, then went still. I held my breath, waiting for another sound. But there was nothing, just silence so thick it pressed against my chest. Sarah grabbed my hand, her fingers cold, and I squeezed back, trying to stay calm for her sake. Jake whispered, "What the hell?" So quiet I barely heard him, but Mrs. Larson shot him a look that could have burned through steel. After what felt like forever, probably 20 minutes, the loudspeaker crackled again. "All clear," Principal Hayes said, his voice steadier now. "Please remain in your classrooms until further instructions." We stayed put, still crouched, until Mrs. Larson got a call on the classroom phone. She listened, nodded, and hung up, her face still pale but less panicked. "It's okay," she said, standing. "You can go back to your seats." It was a false alarm. Nobody moved right away, like we didn't trust it. Slowly, we crawled out, the room filling with nervous chatter. Sarah looked at me, her voice low. "That didn't feel like a false alarm." I nodded, my throat tight. "Didn't." Later, at lunch, the cafeteria was a mess of rumors. Some kids said it was a prank, someone pulling the fire alarm to get out of a test. Others said they heard there was a guy with a knife in the parking lot. Mike, who'd been in the art room, said he saw cop cars through the window, at least 3 of them. Jake was back to his usual self, joking about how he almost peed his pants, but I could tell he was rattled. I kept scanning the cafeteria for Caleb, but he wasn't there. I hadn't seen him in computer applications that morning either. He'd been absent, which wasn't like him. My stomach twisted, the pizza on my tray untouched. Was he involved? Or was I just paranoid, connecting dots that didn't exist? After school, I was at my locker when I overheard Mr. Kessler talking to another teacher in the hall. "They found a bag in the maintenance shed," he said, his voice low. "No weapons, just stuff. Wires, batteries, weird electronics." The other teacher muttered something I couldn't hear, and they walked off. My blood ran cold. Wires? Batteries? My mind went straight to Caleb, to the circuit board in the equipment room, the flashlight by the sheds. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, but it felt too close, too real. I grabbed my stuff and headed to the parking lot, my head spinning. As I unlocked my bike, I saw Caleb across the lot, walking toward the street. He wasn't carrying his backpack, just a small black bag slung over his shoulder. He didn't look my way, but I felt like he knew I was there, watching. I stood frozen, the cold air biting my face, wondering what I just stepped into. The lockdown left a mark on Willow Creek High, like a bruise you didn't notice until you pressed it. The hallways felt different now, quieter, as if everyone was holding their breath. Kids still laughed and shoved each other, but there was an edge to it, a nervousness that hadn't been there before. I couldn't shake the image of Caleb with that black bag, or Mr. Kessler's words about wires and batteries. It was like a puzzle with half the pieces missing, and I was too scared to look for the rest. At home, I'd sit in my room, the glow of my desk lamp casting shadows on the walls, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But every creak of the house, every rustle outside my window made my heart race. I wasn't sleeping much, and it showed. My eyes were red, my temper short. My mom noticed, asking if I was okay, but I brushed her off. How could I explain something I didn't understand? At school, Caleb was back in computer applications, sitting in his corner like nothing had happened. But he looked different, his face paler, his movements jerkier, like he was wound too tight. Derek and Tyler were still at it, their comments sharper now, as if the lockdown had given them permission to push harder. One day, Tyler leaned over and said, "Hey, Caleb, you hiding bombs in that bag of yours?" It was loud, meant to get laughs, and it did, nervous, uneasy laughs from the kids around them. Caleb's hands froze on the keyboard, his knuckles white. For a second, I thought he might say something, but he just stared at his screen, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch. I felt a surge of anger, not just at Tyler but at myself. Why wasn't I doing anything? Why was I just sitting there, letting it happen? But the moment passed and I stayed silent, my cowardice a bitter taste in my mouth. After class, I lingered, watching Caleb pack up. He moved slowly, deliberately, like he was buying time. Mr. Kessler was at his desk, grading papers, oblivious to the tension in the room. I thought about approaching Caleb, asking if he was okay, but what would I even say? "Hey, were you sneaking around with a flashlight? What's with the weird bag?" It sounded ridiculous, accusatory. Instead, I headed to the library, hoping to clear my head. The library was my safe spot, with its musty smell of old books and the soft hum of the computers. I was skimming through a history book when I heard a chair scrape nearby. It was Sarah, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her expression serious. "Ethan, you look like crap," she said, sitting across from me. I forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. She leaned forward, her voice low. "What's going on with you? You've been weird since the lockdown." I hesitated, then spilled it, everything. The flashlight, the phone call, the bag, the rumors about the boiler room. Sarah listened, her eyes narrowing, her fingers drumming on the table. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time, then said, "You think Caleb's dangerous, don't you?" It wasn't an accusation, but it hit hard. Did I? I didn't know. I told her about the maintenance shed, the wires, and her face tightened. That's weird, she admitted. But we don't know what it means. Maybe he's just into tech stuff, like building radios or something. I wanted to believe her, but the doubt in her voice mirrored my own. She reached across the table, touching my arm. Just be careful, okay? Don't go playing hero. I nodded, but her words didn't ease the knot in my chest. That afternoon, I was walking to baseball practice when I saw something that stopped me cold. Near the bleachers, hidden by a row of bushes, Caleb was talking to a guy I didn't recognize. The guy was older, maybe college age, with dark hair and a leather jacket. He was leaning in close, his voice low, handing Caleb a small package wrapped in brown paper. Caleb took it, tucking it into his jacket, his eyes darting around like he was scared of being seen. I ducked behind a tree, my pulse hammering. Who was that guy? What was in the package? My mind went to dark places, drugs, weapons, something worse. I waited until they split up, Caleb heading toward the school, the other guy disappearing into the parking lot. I stood there, my cleats sinking into the grass, feeling like I'd stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. Practice was a blur, my swings off, my focus shot. Coach Riley yelled at me to get my head in the game, but all I could think about was that package and what it meant. November rolled in, and Willow Creek was draped in fog, the kind that clung to your skin and made everything look like a dream you couldn't wake from. I was on edge, jumping at shadows, my mind replaying that moment by the bleachers. I hadn't told anyone about the guy with the package, not even Sarah. It felt too real, too dangerous, like speaking it aloud would make it worse. At school, things were tense. The lockdown had faded into rumors, but the teachers were stricter now, checking hall passes, locking classroom doors during breaks. It was like they knew something we didn't, and it made the air feel heavy, like a storm was coming. I saw Caleb less in the hallways, but when I did, he looked worse, dark circles under his eyes, his clothes wrinkled like he hadn't slept in days. In computer applications, he was quieter than ever, if that was possible. Derek and Tyler had backed off a little, maybe bored, maybe sensing something off, but the damage was done. Caleb's silence wasn't just silence anymore, it was a wall, impenetrable, and I could feel the weight of it every time I looked at him. I kept thinking about the package, wondering if it was still in his jacket hidden away. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but every time I got close, my nerve failed me. What if I was wrong? What if I made things worse? One Saturday, I was at Marty's diner with Jake and Mike, trying to act normal. The place was packed, the air thick with the smell of burgers and coffee, the jukebox playing some old Springsteen song. We were in a booth talking about the upcoming homecoming game, but my heart wasn't in it. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see Caleb or that guy in the leather jacket. Jake was mid-story, waving a fry for emphasis, when Mike nudged me. "Yo, Ethan, you're spacing out again. What's up?" I shrugged, muttering something about being tired, but Mike's eyes narrowed. He was good at reading people, better than Jake or Sarah. "You sure?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, but I could tell he didn't buy it. As we left the diner, the fog was thicker, the streetlights glowing like halos. We were walking to Jake's truck when I heard a commotion down the street, near the gas station. A couple of cop cars were parked, their lights flashing, and a small crowd was gathering. My stomach dropped. I told Jake and Mike I'd catch up, then jogged over, my sneakers slapping the wet pavement. The gas station was lit up, the neon sign buzzing, and I saw two cops talking to the clerk inside. Outside, a guy was sitting on the curb, his hands cuffed behind him. It wasn't Caleb, but it was the guy from the bleachers, same leather jacket, same dark hair. My breath caught and I stepped back, blending into the crowd. The clerk was gesturing wildly, saying something about a suspicious package left in the bathroom. I didn't stick around to hear more. I ran back to Jake's truck, my mind racing. Was this connected to Caleb? Had that package changed hands again? At school on Monday, I was a wreck, scanning every corner for Caleb. He was in computer applications, but he looked shaken, his hands trembling slightly as he typed. I kept stealing glances, trying to read him, but his face was a mask. After class, I followed him at a distance, telling myself I just wanted to see where he went. He headed to the library, and I slipped in after him, keeping my head down. He was at a computer in the back, typing furiously, his screen showing a chat window, not MySpace, something encrypted with weird symbols and no names. I couldn't see much, but it looked serious, like he was talking to someone who wasn't supposed to be found. I left before he noticed me, my heart pounding, my resolve crumbling. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The second lockdown hit like a punch, sudden and disorienting. It was a Thursday, fourth period, and I was in history with Mr. Donovan, who was droning on about the Civil War. The room was stuffy, the windows fogged up from the cold outside, and I was doodling in my notebook, trying not to think about Caleb or the gas station. The loudspeaker crackled, and Principal Hayes's voice cut through, urgent and strained. Lockdown. This is not a drill. Lock all doors, lights off, stay quiet. Mr. Donovan froze mid-sentence, his chalk dropping to the floor. He moved fast, locking the door and flipping the light switch, plunging us into darkness. Under the desks, he hissed, his voice tighter than I'd ever heard. We scrambled, the room a chaos of whispers and scraping chairs. I ended up next to Mike, his sketchbook clutched to his chest, his eyes wide with fear. The classroom was a black void, the only light a faint glow from the emergency exit sign. My knees ached against the hard floor, my breath loud in my ears. I could hear Mr. Donovan breathing heavily near the door, his silhouette tense. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional sniffle or rustle of clothing. My mind went straight to Caleb. Was he behind this? Was that package part of something bigger? I hated myself for thinking it, for turning him into a villain, but the pieces were piling up, too many to ignore. Mike leaned closer, his voice barely audible. This is bad, man. You hear anything? I shook my head, but my eyes were glued to the door, waiting for anything to happen. Then we heard it, footsteps, heavy and uneven, echoing down the hallway. They weren't like the ones from the first lockdown, careful and deliberate. These were erratic, like someone was stumbling, or worse, running. They got closer, then stopped, right outside our room. A low thud hit the door, not a knock but something heavier, like a shoulder or a fist. A girl across the room gasped, and Mr. Donovan hissed, quiet. My heart was in my throat, my hands clammy. I kept picturing Caleb, his pale face, that black bag. Was he out there? Was he the one making that sound? The thud came again, softer this time, followed by a faint, muffled voice, male, but too low to make out. I strained to listen, but it was gone as fast as it came. The footsteps started again, moving away, fading into the distance. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, though it was probably 30 minutes. My legs cramped, my back ached, but I didn't dare move. Mike was trembling next to me, his sketchbook forgotten. I wanted to say something to reassure him, but I was just as scared. Finally, the loudspeaker buzzed, and Principal Hayes's voice came through, exhausted but calm. All clear. Remain in your classrooms until escorted. Mr. Donovan didn't move right away, his hand still on the door. When he finally turned on the lights, the room looked wrong, like we'd all aged a decade. Nobody spoke as we climbed back into our seats, our eyes darting to the windows, the door, each other. Later, we learned it was a security breach, but the details were vague. A teacher's aide saw someone in a hoodie near the back entrance, carrying a bag, and called it in. The cops searched the school, found nothing, but the mood was grim. At lunch, the cafeteria was subdued, kids whispering about a bomb threat or a shooter. I looked for Caleb, but he wasn't there. I asked Sarah if she'd seen him, and she shook her head, her face pale. Ethan, you need to stop obsessing, she said, but her voice trembled. I knew she was scared too. That night, I lay awake, the memory of those footsteps looping in my head, wondering how close we'd come to something terrible. The days after the second lockdown were a blur, like walking through a fog that wouldn't lift. Willow Creek High was on edge, the teachers jumpy, the students whispering. My parents wanted to pull me out, send me to a private school an hour away, but I begged them to let me stay. I didn't know why, maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was because I felt tied to whatever was happening with Caleb. I couldn't just walk away, not now. But the weight of it was crushing me, and I was starting to crack. My grades were slipping, my swings at baseball practice were weak, and even Jake noticed, calling me out for being distant. I wanted to tell him everything, but the words wouldn't come. How do you explain a gut feeling that's eating you alive? Caleb was back in school, but he was a ghost more than ever. In computer applications, he sat hunched over his keyboard, his eyes bloodshot, his fingers moving slower than usual. Derek and Tyler had stopped their teasing entirely, which should have been a relief, but it wasn't. Their silence felt ominous, like they knew something I didn't. I caught Derek staring at Caleb once, not with his usual smirk but with something like fear. It made my skin crawl. I kept replaying every moment, the flashlight, the package, the chat window, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Caleb was spiraling, and I was the only one who saw it. One afternoon, I was in the parking lot, unlocking my bike, when I saw Caleb sitting on a bench near the bus stop. He was alone, his black bag at his feet, staring at the ground. My stomach churned, but I knew I couldn't keep avoiding him. I walked over, my hands sweaty, my heart pounding. "Hey, Caleb," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted. He looked up, startled, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl. I froze, unsure what to say. "Just checking in," I managed. "You okay?" He stared at me, his expression unreadable, then let out a bitter laugh. "Why do you care, Ethan? You don't know me." His words hit like a slap, but he wasn't wrong. I didn't know him, not really. But I couldn't walk away. I sat down, keeping some distance, and tried again. "Look, I saw you with that guy. By the bleachers. And the lockdown stuff, it's freaking everyone out." His face hardened, and for a second I thought he might bolt. But he didn't. He leaned back, his hands gripping the bench. "You think I'm the bad guy, don't you?" he said, his voice quiet but sharp. I didn't answer because I didn't know. He shook his head, a small, sad smile on his lips. "You don't get it. Nobody does." He grabbed his bag and stood, but before he walked away, he looked at me, his eyes full of something I couldn't name, anger, pain, maybe both. "Stay out of it, Ethan. For your own good." I sat there, stunned, as he disappeared down the street. My mind was a mess, guilt and fear twisting together. Had I just made things worse? Should I tell someone, Mr. Kessler, the principal, my parents? But what would I say? That Caleb was acting weird? That I didn't trust him? It wasn't enough, but it was too much to ignore. That night I was at Sarah's house, sitting on her porch, the air cold and sharp. I told her about the conversation and she listened, her arms crossed, her face tight. "Ethan, you need to do something," she said. "If he's in trouble, or if he's dangerous, you can't just sit on it." I knew she was right, but the thought of turning him in felt like a betrayal. He'd looked at me like I was the only one who'd ever tried to see him, and I'd already let him down. The next day, I went to Mr. Kessler's office after school, my stomach in knots. He was packing up, his desk a mess of papers and empty coffee cups. I stood in the doorway, my throat dry, and said, "Can we talk?" "It's about Caleb." Mr. Kessler looked up, surprised, then nodded, gesturing to a chair. I sat, my hands shaking, and started talking about the teasing, the flashlight, the package, everything. He listened, his face growing serious, and when I finished, he leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "Ethan, this is a lot," he said. "I'll talk to the principal, but we need to be careful. Accusations like this can ruin someone." I nodded, but as I left, I felt sick, like I just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The fallout came faster than I expected. By the next morning, whispers were spreading through Willow Creek High like wildfire. Caleb wasn't in school, and nobody knew why. Some kids said he'd been suspended, others that he'd been arrested. I overheard Ashley read in the hallway, her voice hushed but excited, saying she heard the cops searched his locker and found something weird. My stomach twisted, guilt and dread mixing into a sickening knot. Had I done this? Had my talk with Mr. Kessler set this in motion? I wanted to believe I'd done the right thing, but it didn't feel right. It felt like I betrayed the one person who'd needed someone to trust him. In computer applications, the room was quieter without Caleb. Derek and Tyler were subdued, their usual bravado gone. I caught them glancing at his empty seat, their faces pale, like they were wondering if they'd pushed him too far. Mr. Kessler was stricter than usual, his eyes scanning the room like he was looking for trouble. I tried to focus on my assignment, but my hands were shaking, the code blurring on the screen. Sarah texted me during class, a single word, "What happened?" I didn't reply. I didn't know how to explain the mess I'd made, or if I'd made one at all. All I knew was that Caleb was gone, and the school felt emptier without him. At lunch, I sat with Jake, Sarah, and Mike, but the conversation was strained. Jake tried to lighten the mood, joking about the cafeteria food, but it fell flat. Sarah kept looking at me, her eyes searching, like she was waiting for me to say something. Finally, she leaned in, her voice low. "Ethan, did you tell someone about Caleb?" I nodded, my throat tight, and told them about my talk with Mr. Kessler. Jake's jaw dropped, and Mike just stared at his tray, his fork frozen. Sarah's face softened, but there was worry in her eyes. "You did what you thought was right," she said, but it sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I didn't feel right. I felt like I'd thrown Caleb to the wolves. After school, I rode my bike to the edge of town, needing to clear my head. The fields stretched out golden under the fading sun, the air sharp with the smell of cut grass. I stopped by a creek, the water gurgling over rocks, and sat on the bank, tossing pebbles into the current. I kept thinking about Caleb's words, "You don't know me." He was right. I didn't know him, but I judged him, pieced together a story from fragments and fear. What if he was just a kid in over his head, caught up in something he didn't understand? What if the package, the flashlight, the chat window were nothing sinister, just a desperate attempt to feel in control? I wanted to find him, to apologize, but I didn't even know where he lived. The next day, I overheard Mr. Kessler talking to Principal Hayes outside the office. "They didn't find anything concrete," Mr. Kessler said, his voice low. "Just some electronics, nothing illegal. But his parents, they're worried. He's not talking. Principal Hayes sighed, rubbing his temples. We can't take risks, not after the lockdowns. I slipped away before they saw me, my mind reeling. So Caleb wasn't in trouble, not officially, but he was still gone, and nobody knew why. I felt a flicker of relief, but it was drowned out by guilt. I'd stirred something up, and now Caleb was paying the price. I went to the library, hoping to find answers, but all I found was an empty table where he used to sit, his absence louder than any rumor. That night, I was in my room, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge downstairs. I was trying to study, but my history book lay open, untouched. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. My heart stopped as I opened it. You shouldn't have said anything. See. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking, the words burning into my brain. Was it really Caleb? How did he get my number? I typed a reply, I'm sorry, I was scared, but deleted it. What could I say? I'd made my choice, and now I had to live with it. I turned off my phone, the darkness closing in, and lay there, wondering what Caleb was doing and if I'd ever see him again. Winter crept into Willow Creek, the air sharp with frost, the fields outside town brittle and gray. The school tried to move on, plastering homecoming banners over the tension, but the lockdowns had left scars, invisible but deep. I was a mess, carrying the weight of that text from Caleb or whoever it was like a stone in my chest. I hadn't told anyone about it, not Sarah, not my parents. It felt too personal, too raw, like admitting it would make it real. My days were a haze of classes and baseball practice, my nights spent staring at my ceiling, replaying every moment with Caleb. Had I misjudged him? Had I pushed him further into whatever darkness he was fighting? The guilt was relentless, gnawing at me, and I didn't know how to make it stop. At school, Caleb's absence was a void, louder than his silence ever was. Kids whispered about him, their stories growing wilder. Some said he'd run away, others that he was in juvie. I avoided the rumors, but they followed me, clinging like damp cold. In computer applications, his empty seat was a constant reminder, and I caught Mr. Kessler glancing at it, his face unreadable. Derek and Tyler were different now, quieter, their cocky grins replaced by something subdued, almost haunted. Once, I overheard Tyler in the hallway, his voice low, saying to Derek, "You think we messed him up? Like, for real?" Derek didn't answer, just shrugged, but the question hung in the air, heavy with truth. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them they didn't get to feel bad now, not after everything. But I didn't. I was just as guilty, maybe more. One afternoon I was in the cafeteria, picking at a soggy burger when Sarah slid into the seat across from me. Her eyes were tired, her usual spark dimmed. "Ethan, you can't keep doing this," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You're falling apart." I looked away, my jaw tight. She wasn't wrong, but hearing it stung. I told her about the text, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Her face paled, her fingers twisting a napkin. "You need to tell someone," she said. "The principal, the cops, someone." I shook my head, my throat burning. What if it wasn't him? What if I'm wrong again? She reached for my hand, her touch steady. "You're not wrong to be scared. But you can't carry this alone." I nodded, but deep down, I knew I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. That weekend, I went to Marty's diner alone, needing space from the noise in my head. The place was quiet, just a few regulars nursing coffee, the jukebox humming a low tune. I was in a corner booth, staring out the window at the fog, when I saw a figure across the street, standing under a streetlight. My heart stopped. It was Caleb. He was thinner, his jacket hanging loose, his face half hidden by a hood. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching the diner. I froze, my coffee cup trembling in my hand. Was he looking for me? Did he know I was here? I wanted to run, to confront him, to apologize, but my legs wouldn't move. Before I could decide, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the fog. I sat there, my pulse racing, the diner's warmth suddenly suffocating. Had it really been him, or was my mind playing tricks? I didn't know anymore. Back at school, I tried to focus, but everything felt wrong. I kept expecting Caleb to show up, to walk into class like nothing had happened, but he didn't. One day, I was cleaning out my locker, tossing old papers, when I found a folded note tucked behind a textbook. My hands shook as I opened it. In neat, slanted handwriting, it read, "You tried. That's more than most." No signature, but I knew it was from Caleb. I stood there, the hallway buzzing around me, feeling like the floor had dropped out. Was this his goodbye? His forgiveness? Or something else? I stuffed the note in my pocket, my heart heavy with questions I'd never answer. I wanted to believe he was okay, that he'd found a way out of whatever was pulling him down. But the truth was, I didn't know, and that uncertainty was a wound that wouldn't heal. I started seeing a counselor at school, Mrs. Harper, a kind woman with gray hair and a soft voice. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to ease the pressure. She talked about guilt, how it can twist you up, make you see threats where there aren't any. I listened, but part of me resisted. Caleb wasn't just in my head. He was real, and so was the fear he'd left behind. I kept the note in my desk drawer, reading it late at night when the house was quiet, searching for meaning. It was the only piece of him I had left, and I wasn't ready to let it go. Spring came to Willow Creek, tentative and soft, the fields greening, the air sweet with blooming lilacs. Willow Creek High was trying to heal, the lockdowns fading into uneasy memory, replaced by chatter about prom and graduation. But for me, the wounds were still fresh, the weight of Caleb's absence a constant ache. I was better, though, sleeping more, laughing easier, thanks to Mrs. Harper and my friends. Sarah, Jake, and Mike had stuck by me, their patience a lifeline. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd failed Caleb, that I'd seen the signs but hadn't done enough. His note was still in my drawer, its words a quiet echo, and I wondered where he was, if he'd found peace or was still lost in whatever storm had consumed him. School was different now, the hallways brighter but haunted. Derek and Tyler had changed, their bravado gone, their laughter rare. I saw Tyler helping a freshman with his locker once, his voice gentle like he was making amends. Derek kept to himself, his eyes down, and I wondered if they carried their own guilt, their own scars. Mr. Kessler was stricter, his laid-back vibe replaced by a quiet intensity, and I heard he'd started a coding club, maybe to reach kids like Caleb. The school had new security cameras, metal detectors at the entrances, a reminder of how close we'd come to something unthinkable. Felt safer, but it wasn't the same. It never would be. One morning, I was early for first period, sitting in the courtyard with a coffee, the sun warm on my face. I was flipping through my history notes when I saw a familiar figure across the street, near the bus stop. My breath caught. It was Caleb or someone who looked like him. He was taller, his hair shorter, wearing a clean jacket, no hood. He was talking to a woman, maybe his mom, her hand on his shoulder, her smile soft. He looked okay, not happy, but not broken. I stood, my coffee forgotten, wanting to call out, but I didn't. What would I say? Instead, I watched as they boarded a bus, the doors hissing shut, and it pulled away. I sat back down, my heart pounding, a mix of relief and longing washing over me. Was it really him? I wanted to believe it was, that he'd found a way forward, that he wasn't the shadow I'd feared. I never told anyone about that moment, not even Sarah. Felt too fragile, like a dream I didn't want to break. But it changed something in me, loosened the knot I'd been carrying. I started paying attention to the kids around me, the ones who sat alone, who slipped through the cracks. I'd say hi, ask about their day, small things that felt bigger now. I didn't want to miss another Caleb, to let someone else fade into the dark. It wasn't much, but it was something, a way to make up for the chances I'd missed. One evening, I was at the creek where I'd gone after getting Caleb's text, the water glinting under the setting sun. I pulled the note from my pocket, its edges worn from handling. You tried. That's more than most. I read it one last time, then tore it into pieces, letting them float away on the current. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was closure, or as close as I'd get. I stood there, the breeze cool against my skin, and felt lighter, like I could finally breathe. Caleb was gone, but his shadow had taught me something, about kindness, about courage, about the cost of looking away. Years later, I'm still in Willow Creek, working at a hardware store, saving up for college. I think about Caleb sometimes, wonder where he ended up. I hope he's okay, that he found someone who saw him, who listened. I'll never know the whole story, and maybe that's okay. Some things you carry not because they're heavy, but because they're part of you. This story, it's not just about Caleb or the lockdowns. It's about the moments we choose to act or don't and how they shape us. Thanks for listening, for sticking with me through this. It means more than you know. Stay safe out there and keep an eye on the quiet ones, they've got stories too.